2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote. I could easily have done the same again. The path was clear. But it would have required that I go along with President Trump's lie about the 2020 election. It would have required that I enable his ongoing efforts to unravel our democratic system and attack the foundations of our republic. That was a path I could not and would not take.
Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney may have lost her primary, but she's wasting no time on her mission to ensure Donald Trump never sits in the Oval Office again. She's launching a new organization with one goal: keep Trump from winning. Speaking of the presidency, Cheney might be setting herself up for a 2024 run.
Are you thinking about running for president?
That's a decision that I'm going to make in the coming months, Savannah. I'm not going to make any announcements here this morning, but it is something that I'm thinking about.
Joining me now is Matthew Dowd, MSNBC political contributor and analyst, and author of Revelations on the River, and Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark and MSNBC contributor and columnist. Gentlemen, welcome to you this Sunday morning. So, Matthew, let's start with that clip we just heard. What do you think's going on with Liz right now? Is she weighing a serious thought of 2024? What does that presidential run even look like? Could she get through a Republican primary with the direction of the GOP headed the way it is?
Well, having worked with Liz in two different presidential campaigns, I know she approaches these things realistically and with a sense of logic. So she knows the numbers in the Republican primary. She knows why she lost that race in Wyoming. She knows how it unfolds nationally. I don't think she realistically thinks she could win the Republican presidential nomination. I don't think that's in her mind. But I do think what is in her mind is what she has stated is that she'll do anything possible to keep Trump from being in the Oval Office. If that means launching a campaign where she takes on Donald Trump day in and day out and the other Republicans who have facilitated and enabled him in the course of this, I think that's what she'll do. And I think it serves a grander, bigger purpose than just what happens in her politics. So I think she gets all that. She understands all that. And one thing I've said before about her, knowing her, not as well as others, but knowing her, she's not going to do anything that's going to help Donald Trump win the office. So people have talked about her running as an independent. If she thinks running as an independent is going to help Donald Trump in a campaign, she won't do it. Her whole goal is keep Trump out of the White House.
Yeah, and that's that goal. I think Charlie has some ancillary benefits, because when you look at Cheney's loss, along with the retirement of folks like Adam Kinzinger and other center-right Republicans who have been out there pushing up against these extremists. That means going into this fall and maybe going forward, there's very little opposition to such extremism inside the party. With a large number of far-right candidates on the ballot in November, how concerned should the rest of us be? Because we know with the GOP, they don't give a rat's, they don't care. But how concerned should the rest of us be about what this says and what this may look like come January of next year?
Well, it's going to be ugly. We ought to be very, very concerned about it. And Liz Cheney, in many ways, is a symbol of how the Republican Party has gone off the rails. This is a party that is embracing Sarah Palin and Carrie Lake and Herschel Walker and casting her into outer darkness. But I agree with everything that Matthew said. Liz Cheney understands exactly what she is about right now. She knows why she was defeated. She understands the way the Republican primary electorate has changed in a rather visceral level, having just suffered that shellacking. So I don't think that she is running with any realistic chance of winning the primary, but that's okay, because she understands that even if this is a kamikaze mission and that it will end badly, it's going to be a hell of a ride along the way. And she is going to be a constant foil for both Donald Trump and the crazified right. I think it's going to be interesting when the RNC tries to kick her off the ballot, which they will do, when they deny her a chance to be on the debate stage, which they will do. Now, no disrespect, but when they did that to Joe Walsh and Bill Weld, didn't make much of a ripple. My guess is it's going to be more difficult because this lady is not for turning. She is not going to go quietly into that good night. And also, she speaks to a very different constituency. It's one thing for the three of us to come on MSNBC and talk about the horrors of Donald Trump, but she is still standing up and saying, look, I am a conservative Republican with all of these credentials. I come at this from a different point of view, and she might move incrementally just enough numbers to make a fundamental difference.
So Matthew, before we even get to 2024, we got 2022 and the aftermath potentially of 2022 staring in front of us. I want you to take a listen to a clip from Liz Cheney speaking on the prospects of a speaker, Kevin McCarthy, this morning. Take a listen. Tell me what you think.
Well, my views about Kevin McCarthy are very clear. The Speaker of the House is a second in line for the presidency. It requires somebody who understands and recognizes their duty, their oath, their obligation, and he's been completely unfaithful to the Constitution and demonstrated a total lack of understanding of the significance and the importance of the role of Speaker. So I don't believe he should be Speaker of the House.
That's Liz laying down some pipe. I love it, but that's just me. What's your reaction, my friend?
Well, I think of all the factors that you could look at that could impact the midterms, and the previous panel talked about, I think it's very close. You and I agree that I still think the Democrats have a chance of keeping the House. I think they're favored to win the Senate today. But Liz Cheney provides a great opportunity. She's a principled, traditional conservative who is attacking her own party and basically saying, and she hasn't said this yet, and she may go this far, don't turn the keys over to Kevin McCarthy in this election. That's what underlines this. That would be a danger. And Democrats can use that. She provides an opportunity, and I agree with Charlie, there's a segment of Republicans that she could possibly help move. But to me, more importantly, there's a number of moderate Democrats that are dissatisfied with Joe Biden that are afraid and have a fear of what it would come if they voted for the Republicans. Liz Cheney tells them straightforward what that might mean.
So, Charlie, we find ourselves in a different space these days when you think about the shift in the Republican Party in such a way that you have Democrats feeling bad for Cheney when she lost the election. We're in a whole new world. What's your takeaway? I mean, I think to Matt's important point about what Liz can mean for this upcoming election, how do you read the role that Liz can play going into November and beyond?
Well, Liz Cheney is taking the position that she has taken, and she has given up everything she has done because she regards Donald Trump as an existential threat to democracy. And I think that's part of the challenge for Democrats as well. They may say it's an existential threat to democracy, but are they willing to act like it? Because if they do believe that this is the five-alarm fire, then they need to be able to make common cause with somebody they disagree with on 99% of the issues. And that's essentially what she's saying, that, okay, I am still a conservative Republican, but right now the number one threat to this constitutional order is Donald threatening the extremist Republicans. And I am willing to set aside those ideological differences to work with people in this particular moment. And I would hope that others would be willing to say, okay, I may disagree with you on taxes, on foreign policy, on a variety of other things, but in this particular moment, we need to join together. And she is a very powerful and potent weapon to be able to call out the extremists. I think that if Kevin McCarthy does become Speaker of the House, the Republican majority will, boy, I mean, you want to talk about a clown car for the next 2 years. They will not be able to resist the crazies. They will not be able to say no. They will not be able to resist the temptation to overreach. And Liz Cheney will be there all along to say, hey, remember what I told you it would be like. And Matthew's absolutely right. I do think that she is going to be a credible voice for not just conservative Republicans, but disaffected Democrats and independents who have to be looking at, I may not like the price of gas, but I am not going to turn the keys of the car over to these nut jobs.
I appreciate you both, gentlemen. Matthew Dowd and Charlie Sykes, thank you so much for being with us on the Sunday show.